Hi, this is Laura Bohannon from Heart of Ukraine Ministries. Just giving an update for March 18th. It's day 23 of the war. And we tried for some normalcy today. For most of us, Mark did go into the city to a store that's similar to Home Depot to get a number of things that we need for some projects and some more shelves because storing a lot of the things that we have. Kind of had an interesting situation there. He was looking at some of the shelves and they were more expensive than what he remembered them being, some like we have in our kitchen. And as he was looking at this, one of the guys who worked there came up to him and said, "We want to give you a discount." And Mark was like, "Well, yeah, that's great." And so they wanted to give 1,000 hryvnia off of the 2 shelving units and another discount of a free little basket that Mark said he was going to give to me. And as he was talking with the guy, they wanted to take him up, but he had to pay cash for it. And so he happened to have just taken some money out of the ATM. And he asked him, is this a special deal that the store is doing? And they said no. And he says, well, is it because I work for a charity organization? And they were like, no, they didn't know that. Apparently, they had just been talking about wanting to help somebody, and Mark walked into their field of view, and they decided to help him out. So Mark was kind of walking out of the store just praising God for this out of the blue miracle and blessing that we were able to get the shelving units for a much lower price. So he was pretty happy about that and had to call me and tell me about it. As far as the guys, they worked on some wood frames for the screen doors for our pavilion, which is an outdoor eating area that we have. We really like eating out there, especially in the summers, but the bugs can get pretty bad. So Mark and the men have been working on the screens for the windows and for the 3 doors there. So they kind of did that. They took care of the animals. I washed the dogs, gave them a bath, and then cleaned up our small space here. Mark and I have a very small office area. Then we have a bedroom that pretty much just fits a bed. And then we have our small bathroom where you can kind of sit on the toilet and turn the water on and off. It's a pretty small space that we have, but I took the time just to clean that up, just to do something normal. Did a bunch of loads of laundry, worked on some documents, and of course we did lots of cooking, and we fed the emergency workers this evening. When Mark got home, the guys helped put the shelving units together, and then I stacked them all up and got them in the veranda where they're going to be sitting. And I'll put some pictures on Facebook about that a little bit later. I wanted to spend the majority of my time with you today sharing about the news, because I haven't done that for 2 or 3 days. And it just kind of gets overwhelming seeing all those pictures and reading all the information. I just wanted to do something different for a little while. But today I'm going to go over it. So on the 16th, a regional military administration representative published an intercepted conversation between a Russian soldier and his wife. And the soldier was basically saying that they're in the Mykolaiv region, and he was stating that there's about 70% casualties on the Russian side. They are not going to get any backup. Their main goal at the moment was to think about how they could defect or to turn themselves in as prisoners of war, because they knew that they couldn't retreat because they were being told they would be shot if they retreat. So just some information about what Russian soldiers are talking to their families about. The deputy prime minister, who is responsible for health and welfare in Ukraine, gave a briefing that said that the convoy with food and evacuation buses was not allowed into Mariupol, and they were trying to continue to negotiate that. The green corridors were supposed to be open. Eventually, they did get 2,000 cars out and some buses, and then they arranged for another 2,000 cars to get out. And out of that one, my understanding is that they were fired upon by the Russians, and only 800 of the cars made it through. So they kind of set it up where they would let some go, let others try, and then just kill them. All 15 buses that finally did get in and get residents and get out Late in the evening, it turned out to be 15 buses housing about 6,426 citizens from Mariupol, and of that was 2,039 children. They got into the Zaporozhye area, and my understanding is they were kind of stopped by the Russian troops that were in that area, but they were finally able to move on. Remember, I mentioned that our graduated client who was staying with us, his family, the town that they're from, which is very south part of Ukraine, the mayor was exchanged for 9 Russian soldiers, ranging in age from 2002 to 2003 is when they were born. So he is free now. He had a phone call with the president of Ukraine, and then later on, the Ukrainian president awarded him the Courage of the Third Degree, because when he was taken prisoner, he refused to cooperate with the Russian military. And I'll talk about that from some news today that happened about some of these mayors and city officials that are being taken prisoner by the Russians. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department confirmed that a U.S. citizen had been killed here in Ukraine. We found out more information today. Turns out to be a 68-year-old man, and he was killed, and he was here in Ukraine because of his friend. They use the female variant because here everything's kind of male, female, or neuter in their language, or neutral. And so we are thinking it's just a man who is living here with a girlfriend, probably. At first we were concerned that it might be some missionaries that we had heard about that were in that area, but apparently it's not them. So that's kind of a blessing, although it's sad that this man died. More than 320,000 citizens of Ukraine, most of whom were men, have returned home to Ukraine from living in foreign countries and working there in order to fight in the Ukrainian army. It just kind of shows you the patriotism there of some of the Ukrainians. In the Lugansk area, Russian troops shelled a shelter for mothers with children, knowing exactly what it was. Remember, I mentioned some of those vehicles that were leaving Mariupol. They were fired upon, and also from another town in that area that apparently people were fleeing from, evacuation buses, and they were fired upon and killed. Saw some of those pictures, to include a small child. Very, very hard to look at. The Russians seem to be targeting a lot of historical monuments and museums here in Ukraine, some things like the drama theater. They're targeting those in addition to the hospitals, in addition to the schools. And basically just, if they can't come in and control Ukraine, they're just going to decimate everything. And so there's been in the news a couple of very famous Ukrainians that have died. One was an artist, died in a rocket attack up in Kiev. I read about a very famous male ballet dancer who was killed. I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, he was actually practicing at the Opera House, and it was bombed. So they're just trying to wipe out Ukrainian history and the culture. The Russian army fired cluster bombs on an area in the Kharkov region, and as a result, 6 people died, and the information about the injured is still being investigated. But part of this was when the Russian troops bombed the railway station, shops, pharmacies, and civilian buildings in the center of the town. Again, they're targeting civilians. They're just trying to demoralize the Ukrainian army, because they can't get to some of these locations and protect the people. In the Kharkov area, there was a market that was burning out of control, and I read today that a firefighter was killed while fighting the fires. So for me, being a previous firefighter, that kind of touched my heart quite a bit. In Mariupol, the port city along the Azov Sea, 80 to 90% of the city structures have been bombed out, and there's not a single building without damage, the deputy mayor of Mariupol has said in his address yesterday. So for today, Russia plans to transfer a number of units to Ukraine from the Russian military bases in Armenia. I think there's a post a little bit further on about that they're sending in brand new soldiers with no training. But the biggest thing that was in the news today is about Mariupol. There's just no military solution right now. The Ukrainians are fighting very heavily in Volnovka area, which is a town not too far away. They have got to take control of that and secure it, because if they try and move on to Mariupol, it's going to leave their rear guard open to being attacked. The other thing is that the nearest military units past that are 100 to 125 kilometers away. And in order for them to get there, they would have to go through these open fields, and it would just be a shooting gallery for the Russians with their helicopters and planes and their rockets. And so it's just, Ukraine can't send their soldiers in there because it's just suicide right now. So Ukraine has to just keep continuing to push them back and move the front forward until they can get to Mariupol, which is in the very east side along the southern coast. And you know, it's just really difficult. They want the military wants to get there. They want to save the city and rescue the people who are hiding out there. But unfortunately, military-wise, it's just not feasible yet. So that's one thing that they are working hard to get is to move that direction. One of the interesting things was that one of the Russian delegation of the group that's meeting with the Ukrainians made a number of statements today, and I'll share them with you. But the main opinion is that the statements that these Russian delegation are saying, they're intended, among other things, to provoke tension in the media. And of course, Ukraine's position has never changed: a ceasefire, total withdrawal of all Russian troops, giving back all the land that they've taken in the east and Crimea. And that's kind of the Ukrainian view, but the way that the Russians are presenting it, and you're going to hear it in a minute, it leads people to believe something else. And again, it's just kind of like they're stirring the water in psychological operations, you know. There were some good things around Ukraine today. In Lviv, 109 empty baby carriages were placed in a square there to represent all the children that have been killed in this war so far. So just kind of remembering them. There was a trident laid out with flowers in a square, I believe in Kiev, and just honor Ukraine and the women who are fighting in the military, who are support staff, and those who are putting together camo netting, you know, and doing all sorts of things, making Molotov cocktails, just to recognize their efforts. And then after the program that they had there, they were going to take all those flowers out to the different hospitals and give them to the women around there. People do, in Mariupol, people are still being rescued from the rubble. There's no information about how many are dead yet. Again, there was 1,000 to 1,500 people in that theater when it was bombed. I did see pictures. A couple days before that, they had rocks laid out, spelling out the word children. And so even though the Russians saw it, they still bombed it. And one of the big things that's being discussed right now is that Russia is using their kind of template that they used in Syria, and that's where they hit all the women and the children and hit civilians just to demoralize the troops that were fighting back against them. And that seems to be what they're doing now for the different places that they're bombing right now, and specifically targeting a lot of these hospitals and children and refugees. All of that is to demoralize and make the Ukrainian army feel like they're not doing their job, that they're not being able to rescue the people. And I can only imagine what the soldiers are feeling, you know, and wanting to get to Mariupol and not being able to get there yet. One good point was the Prime Minister of Greece announced that his country is ready to restore the bombed-out maternity hospital in Mariupol. And I shared pictures of that on our social media. The one young woman that was on the stretcher, she ended up dying the next day and losing her child. So very, very sad news there. Russian soldiers actually shelled a hospital today in the Lugansk region. Again, they're targeting the hospitals, the schools, historical monuments, those things. Also in the Kherson region, the Russian military tortured the secretary of the city council that they had captured. And this is what they're doing with a lot of the city officials and with the mayors. They're torturing them, pressuring them, trying to get them to recant Ukraine and to make a statement in support of Russia so that they can record it and show it back home. And so that's why that mayor of that one town got an award from the president, because he did not succumb to the torturing and the pressure to do that. So this specific city council member hasn't been seen for 2 days. They believe that they're being held in a seized police building. But again, the word is getting out that they're being tortured. Russian military, it just seems to have no conscience. It just really reminds you of what happened in World War II with the German troops, the SS, and just the atrocities that they committed. That stuff is going on now. Now, Ukraine is getting a little irritated with the international attention that it's getting in some aspects, especially from the media and the Monday morning quarterbacking that's going on. And basically, the advisor to the head of the president's office said, I have a request, just stop the experts who are hidden away somewhere with their mournful songs about how we should fight correctly, how should we should negotiate for our country. We know what we're doing, and we're going to correct the mistakes that are happening against us. And basically, he's just saying, it's our culture, it's our country. If you don't understand about the culture here, if you don't understand about the history, and you don't know what's going on the ground here, keep it to a minimum. Quit telling us how to do our job. It's one thing if you want to make some recommendations, but it's another to do that Monday morning quarterbacking of every little thing that's going on. So later on, he did a press conference as well, and he talked about the situation with the Russian invasion. And he said that the invaders, the Russians, threw into battle a training unit, which, they weren't even real soldiers, just trainees. They were defeated soundly. They were partially destroyed, and the rest were taken prisoners of war. A victory was that Ukraine struck at an airport in a specific region, and they were able to take out the 8th Combined Army command post. And so one of the things when I was in the Army, our enemy was the Soviet Union, and it kind of tells you how old I am, but we learned a lot about how the Soviet Union, the military, operated. And if you could take out the main leaders of a unit, the whole unit would come to a standstill. And that is still their way of doing things. And so Ukraine understands that, and they're targeting these command posts in order to immobilize all of the soldiers at that point. A general from the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Command of the Ground Forces for Ukraine gave a briefing also today. He said in Kiev over the past few days, more than 100 reconnaissance and sabotage groups were discovered, and they were destroyed because they fought back. They didn't want to surrender. Over the period of the war, the 32 days, 35 different of those groups have been in the capital, and they've actually set off bombs. Russian soldiers are launching strikes from Belarus, the Black Sea, and Ukraine is trying to develop that cover of the sky in order to knock them out of the sky and protect Ukraine, because that's where we're really getting beaten up at. The Ukrainian military is strengthening the third ring of defense around Kiev, so they've been able to come from here out, and they're doing a much better job of protecting Kiev. The Russians tried on the right bank of the river that comes through Kiev, and then on the left bank, and they're keeping them back to about 70 kilometers, which means that they can only lob rockets in there. They can't do any other damage. But again, that's why it's so important that we get the skies closed here in Ukraine. Locally, The head of the Vinnytsia Regional Military Administration shared some photos today on social media of missiles that have been shot out of the sky. So we're very fortunate in this area where a lot of that is happening, where they're taking out the missiles before they land. Here, the head of the delegation from the Russian Federation made a number of statements today regarding the talks that Russia and Ukraine are having. And just listen to his wording here. The neutral status of Ukraine and its non-entry into NATO are topics on which Moscow and Kiev have brought their negotiating positions as close as possible. Okay. Next one is Moscow and Kiev are somewhere halfway on the point of demilitarization of Ukraine within the framework of the ongoing negotiation process. Now, I don't know how you can be halfway when Ukraine says we will not demilitarize. We're not giving up our weapons to protect ourselves. They also said there are nuances in these paragraphs related to the security guarantees for Ukraine. The nuances related to what security guarantees Ukraine would receive in addition to the ones in case of refusal to joining NATO. Interesting statement there. Yeah. The Russian position on the Donbass is clearly formulated. The Russian Federation has no option to give in. Basically, the people of Donbass should decide the issue of managing Donbass. Now, they say that, but the elections that they had, when they took it over, the east of Ukraine, when they first took them over, they had elections, but people were prevented from voting. They brought in a whole bunch of ballots, and people recorded that on their phones. It was not a fair election. It was not true to what the people there wanted. So they're saying that, but the same thing happened in Crimea. And people were not allowed to vote. Places were shut down where they couldn't go vote, and they were harassed into not voting. They had these hooligans out there that were preventing people from going in and voting. Okay, now let's talk about Putin a little bit. So here's a statement from the director of the Institute for Social and Economic Transformation, and he says that the talks about Putin being in a bunker are true. In this context, it is highly doubtful that he would fly to Turkey to meet with the Ukrainian president. The head of the Kremlin has limited all contacts and is afraid that Putin can be killed because he realizes that Putin has invested a lot into this war, which he is losing. Putin is very, very much afraid. Now all conversations with him take place online, and he doesn't let anyone have physical or get around him physically. He was doing a speech at a rally concert in Moscow, which was being broadcasted on all the main Russian TV channels, but all of a sudden it was interrupted. And then the performance of the singer went on the air. The Kremlin said that it was an incident of technical failure, but that just doesn't fit with what's really happening. Also, the main director of the Ministry of the International Affairs for Moscow reported that more than 203,000 people came to the stadium for this concert and to hear Putin speak. Now, they say that 95,000 were in the stadium and that there was more people around it, over 100,000. Now, I watched videos today of some of those people who were moving around in that area, supposedly in support of Putin, and a news media went kind of very quietly in talking to them, and they said, "Why are you here?" And they said, "We don't know. We were at our job sites. We were working. These buses pulled up. The police officers and military gathered all of us up and put us on the bus, and some of us rode for hours to get to this, and we were told to go and be there." So they were forced, and it was mandatory that they came and participated in this demonstration in support of Putin. So it was kind of interesting. So that's the news for today. Again, I could probably talk for hours and hours of what's going on. There are hundreds of posts that are being put on the sites that I'm watching, but I just try and pull out some of the things that you might not see in the news where you're at. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for praying for us, for encouraging us, for donating, for sending boxes. I mean, we're just overwhelmed with the support, but even more so the support for Ukraine. And Ukraine really needs your prayers right now. There are so many people who are afraid, who are grieving. It's just so hard to watch some of the the videos and see the pictures here, it just can be really overwhelming. And each one of us has kind of gone through a moment of being overwhelmed and just feeling like we can't handle much more of it. So if we're feeling that way, we know that most people here in Ukraine are feeling that way. Continue to pray for the soldiers, that they're brave, that the leaders are wise, and that they can just fight back, because they just want to be a peaceful people that live in freedom. Yeah. And one last note about the chaplain who was taken prisoner down in Mariupol by the Russians. Did figure out who that was. I'm not going to say his name, but he is a police chaplain, not a military chaplain, and it is somebody that I did meet on several occasions. It was not the other chaplain that I was concerned about. He must have seen that a chaplain was taken prisoner, and he contacted me, I'm hoping because of that, to let me know that he's okay, that he's serving, that his family is okay. So I was very happy to hear from him. But again, just pray for this chaplain, because I'm sure that the Russian soldiers are not being too kind to him. But if the Chechnyan Muslims are in the area, which they are, and are involved, they're obviously not going to be kind at all to a Christian chaplain. So please just keep him in prayer, keep his family in prayer, and hopefully we'll hear something about him. Thank you and good night.